So, Larry, what's the key to victories for both Sergey Kovalev and Andre Ward?
Hit the other guy harder than he hits you is always the key. But you know, it's an outstanding boxer against an outstanding boxer puncher who's bigger. The key may be who can take the best punch, or who. The key is there's no power if the power doesn't connect. From Ward's point of view, the key is what do you do if you fall behind? Who are you? How much do you want this? Are you willing to take higher risks for the higher rewards?
Yeah, I think that with Ward, he could get out to a lead, and I don't think that's what they want Kovalev to do, is to have to play catch-up in this fight.
I think they want to come out firing, to let Ward feel his strength, and go from there, see how Ward reacts. They're both proud guys. They both are really good at what they do, and we want to see how they respond to getting hit and not getting hit, and trying to impose themselves on their opponents.
Now, if I may ask, have you been on record saying you don't want to see Maypac 2?
Yes.
And why?
Because if you invite me to a party and it turns out to be a lousy party, it's on me if I would go back to a second party.
Okay.
Do I go to a restaurant and have a lousy meal and come back to the restaurant? No. Why would I want to see that again?
Whose fault is it? Because some people say it was Floyd Mayweather's fault, Manny Pacquiao's fault. Who takes the blame? Who was out of character that night?
Mayweather was Mayweather, and I think Pacquiao gets a large share of the blame. I go back far enough that I know that Ali Liston 2 was postponed because Ali had an injury. I know that Ali Foreman was postponed because Foreman had an injury. Why would you fight the most important fight of your life when you're not at your best? Well, we all know why. Because they had been waiting a long time, and it was generating unheard of amounts of money, and those people around Pacquiao were convincing him that he'd be okay. And he wanted the fight as well as the money, and he let his people down. Ernest Hemingway once said, "Don't ever fall in love with a fighter because it'll always break your heart in the end." And I think he broke our hearts.
Now, are you still affiliated with HBO at all, or anything?
Not directly, no.
Okay. What's going on with their boxing schedule, if you don't mind me asking? Do you know the rumblings, or every fight is typically going to pay-per-view?
I don't know. We all know that this used to be the kind of fight that would be on HBO and not on pay-per-view.
That's what I was.
So it has to do with money and what budget you get and how much you can use it to get one fight on HBO rather than on a pay-per-view. And sometimes they would do that with big fights. They wanted it on HBO. But times change. I get that. Budgets change, fighters change, expectations change. Pay-per-view itself has changed over time. So a small pay-per-view fight generates more revenue than HBO could afford to give them to have.
Speaking of change, what's your reaction to PBC in their fights and them wanting to make their stamp in boxing?
I haven't seen that they know how to create a star. There are some good fighters. There haven't been enough good fights. And So everything one hears or even sees, it seems to be going south from there. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe they'll have to make the good fights now, instead of just giving us a pablum to build up the next good fight.
You were like an icon. Watched you so much. Do you miss not being in there? And I miss you not being in there. I wondered if you missed it.
Thank you. I've been asked if I'd rather be retired than working, and I say I'd rather be doing both. So yeah, in a way I miss it. And occasionally I get to do something. But yeah, I did it for a big part of my life, and I loved doing it. But I have no complaints.
Well, you influenced a lot of people. I wondered, I know you were a writer, newspaper guy. Who influenced you as an interviewer?
I was a print journalist guy, and back in the day, I worshipped certain writers, Red Smith, Jimmy Cannon, Dan Parker, some names from the way back. And I learned my craft, and I transitioned into television, and to me, it's just another way of telling a story. But to remind myself from time to time that it's show and tell, and if the show is good enough, get out of the way.
Well, we hope you don't get out of anybody's way. Keep getting in our way. We appreciate it, and always enjoyed you, Larry, and appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you. I'm just an old boxing degenerate that came down to see a good fight.
If I could ask you one question, because you're quite the historian, you have a Shakespearean way of eloquently displaying your boxing intelligence. Expound on the state of America. I'm not asking you who you voted for, but just state on America. Donald Trump wins presidency. We have uprisings in inner cities. We've never, in my era, I've never ever seen successful Caucasian people in an uprising against a president. You understand where I'm coming from? So you've gone through Muhammad Ali. You've gone through MLK. You've gone, and what's the state of America today as it relates to social relations and?
Well, I think I've read 1,000, heard 1,000 postmortems on the election, and a lot of people are trying to figure it out. A lot of people are smarter than me, and I think it's kind of fluid, just as manufacturing and industrialization has changed because of changes in technology, that the new technology, social media and all that is having impact that is hard to measure at this time, and we don't know where it's taking us. I'm sitting here with New York Times. I can't get through my day without reading the New York Times. If I think I'm going to be informed and entertained and want to know what's going on in the world. But I have children and grandchildren who get all the news that fits their phone instead of the print. And so how that affects life on our planet is still unfolding.
Thank you. I appreciate you. And you're not predicting this fight, right? I think I heard you just go 50-50 on it. Yeah.
I can make a really good case for both fighters winning the fight. The history of these things is that the boxer wins.
That's why.
But you can make a case for Kovalev being the bigger, stronger guy and finding and being a good boxer puncher to neutralize the neutralizer.
What do you think about MMA pay-per-views rising and boxing pay-per-views kind of like on the down low?
You know what? I don't know, because they say that's true, but they won't show it to you. I can recall a boxing promoter challenging the UFC guy to show what their pay-per-views were against what boxing pay-per-views were. And the UFC guy said, no, that was a private matter.
But maybe, as a man that covers both things on TV and radio and the newspaper in the UK, perhaps it's a generational thing and we won't know for maybe another 10 years.
Well, I think that's all true. I think that it connects to me with the short attention span.
Yeah.
And if you were walking down the street and saw a good street fight, you'd probably stop and take a look at it. And they've found a way to market that. And that's exciting.
Are you suggesting that there isn't great skill in it there as well?
I think there's some skill involved, of course,
Yeah.
as well as strength and will and all the rest of that. But unless you are really steeped in that, the optics tell you, well, okay, something's going to happen. And in boxing or prize fighting, as I prefer to think of it, that's not necessarily true. There's something maybe closer to nothing.
Have you seen?
Thank you.
Have you seen McGregor? Have you watched him fight?
No.
Not at all. Do you know of any of the fighters?
I can't name 3 of them. So, and I don't think that many of the fans can either. I don't think they care.
Can I ask you something about a guy who could go on to be a very famous boxer if it works out right for him? We've got a new kid in the UK. He's already a world champion, although I'd call him a neophyte world champion, Anthony Joshua. What do you make of him?
I think he has the look of a champion, so that if he lives up to his look, and by look I'm not just talking about how he stands and actually looks, he's got a chance to be a star. Whether he's that good or not, we don't know yet.
And what about Fury, Tyson Fury? Does he entertain you?
He did. And now it's turned out to be the tragedy. And it fascinates me about how he crossed worlds to become the champion and then completely imploded. I don't know if that's been examined.
Well, he's getting therapy at the moment. I spoke to George Foreman in London a couple of weeks ago. He's over, and he said what Tyson Fury didn't know was there's no apprenticeship for being heavyweight champion of the world, and the microphone is the weapon of mass destruction these days, which I thought was very salient.
Yes, it's a mass revelation as well, but coming from the world he came from, to travel the world. Something of which I saw on the series Peaky Blinders. You can understand what a long travel that is from that world into the popular culture of a country, and dealing with what you've wanted all along to deal with.
Final question from me, okay, and I will leave you guys in peace. The LA Times, one of the LA Times correspondents wrote a piece the other day, Larry, saying that boxing is dead. He's sitting over there laughing, but he's an expert. He's one of those experts, Larry, yeah? The experts that travels around different sports, they know it all, yeah? He said boxing's dead. What do you make of that?
Well, you know, his timing when he wrote a piece about that in the LA Times was a little bit off, because that was 3 days before Canelo fought before 52,000 people in Dallas, and I wrote the LA Times a letter about that, how we mourned the end of the sport with 52,000 others at the funeral.
Very good, very good. So it's not dead, is it? It's peaks and troughs, surely.
I liken it to Broadway. which is also the Royal Theater. Also been buried many times. And then Hamilton comes along, and people are making hotel reservations to be there.
Yeah. Trends, maybe? Trends, fads, stars?
Look, nobody can deny that boxing is going from being mainstream to being
Niche?
niche is fair enough. So is horse racing, so is a number of other things. Things change over time. And but it has a hardcore of ardent fans and that support it. And if we get some good fighters and good fights, it'll attract some of the casual fans.
Larry, as a guy who's covered boxing in New York when it was at its mecca, what are your thoughts of the insurance laws going on in New York? Basically putting, maybe not the major boxing events out of business, but putting club shows that, grow the New York boxers into being the stars out of business.
It sounds suicidal for the boxing commission to do that to boxing. It sounds like they wanted to put themselves out of business. I don't understand. I understand the impulse. There should be some kind of insurance for fighters who are putting their lives on the line. But it's also a business, and like football players, for example, the point is, are their eyes wide open when they go into it? I once asked Nelson Mandela, who had been a very elite amateur fighter, how could he, as a man who promoted nonviolence, be such a fan of the most violent sport, boxing? And he thought for a moment and he said, in boxing, they do it voluntarily. If you know what you're getting yourself into, and you're willing to take the risk, then that's part of the deal. No different in football. We've been finding out about injuries in football. I was saying that on HBO 25 years ago, that when a player goes down and gets dinged and all that, that's a knockdown. That's the same thing as a knockdown. In boxing, you can't come back to the gym for a month. In football, they want you in the next series of downs. So, but their eyes are wide open. They know what they're getting into.
Who's the next superstar of boxing?
When you say superstar,
You define superstar.
well,
It's subjective.
to me, a superstar is, okay, Oscar De La Hoya was a superstar. He wasn't
an icon.
He wasn't as great as the greatest fighters. He was a superstar. A superstar is a hell of a good fighter who has made some connection and people are moved by it. Manny Pacquiao was a superstar, I think. I don't know. I mean, does Crawford have the ability to be a star as a fighter? Yes. A superstar? Not sure. Probably not. That's the rarest thing. A superstar is rarer than a champion. Even a hell of a good champion doesn't necessarily become a superstar. Is Ward a superstar? Hell of a good fighter.
I don't think Crawford. I don't think Crawford wants to be a. He doesn't.
Well,
he doesn't seem to want.
I
that.
think part of it. I think, for example, I think Canelo Alvarez wants to be great. I think he comes from a culture that values that. The culture, the fans of Mexico, identified him as a teenager as their next great standard bearer, and he wants to be great. He wants to be worthy of that. I don't know that can happen here anymore. But we've been surprised in the past, and My guess is somebody will come along who strikes a nerve.
They always do.
Can you leave us with a boxing story? Can you leave us with a boxing story? I remember you told me the one about you were sitting next to Muhammad Ali on the airplane, and he said he's going to do the parachute. He's going to knock him out in 7
No, this is going to Zaire.
Zaire, yeah. You got another story for me?
Another story?
Yeah.
There are too many of them. When Ray Leonard fought Hagler, coming out of retirement, to fight a bigger guy, he was greatly respected. I had a fight with him. And he had been a colleague of mine. He had been a commentator with us. And I knew him well. And as we were all flying out, he said to me, "Who you picking?" And I said, "I have to pick Hagler, and I hope I'm wrong."
How did he respond to that? Because you know he's about as brash as...
Well, I said the same thing about Mayweather and Pacquiao. I had to pick Mayweather, but I hoped I was wrong.
Thank you for your time.
What about your favorite Mayweather experience?
I'll leave
Besides the obvious.
I'll leave that to you all.
Yeah, we're gonna give him a break here.
You already know what it is. It's Barbershop Conversations. Hit the subscribe and the like button today.